During this summer, while Minister Billy is away on sabbatical, we have many, many wonderful preachers that will be coming to us on Sunday mornings. And this morning we're glad to have Jeanette Purvis, who's been part of our church for many, many years, and we're glad that she is presenting to us today. Jeanette was born in Atlanta and she grew up in Decatur, Georgia. She attended the Candler School of Theology at Asbury University in Atlanta. And she worked for 18 years in medical technology before entering the ministry. Now she's retired from the North Georgia UMC conference, and she and her husband of 33 years, Richard, are a part of the Asbury church and family, and they really love it being a part of us. And they enjoy spending time with their 4 children, 7 grandchildren, and working on their retro house. So we welcome you. Thank you for speaking to us.
I have enjoyed this morning talking to many of you just around the church, and some of you for the very first time that I've met this morning. And some of the conversations have been about what we're going to talk about this morning, and that is fear. Fear is something that has been on my heart, literally, very recently because of all the things going on in the world. And I think maybe that some of us have the perception that fear is something that we can just overcome, that we can put aside, that we can ignore, and it'll just go away. Maybe you think you have fears that you can't overcome, or fears you think that nobody else has. So we're gonna talk about those this morning, and we're also going to talk about some ways that we can, if not overcome fears, at least put them aside and cope with them. So, in those conversations that I had this morning, I found 3 people who are going to come up here and going to talk about their greatest fears. I think these are very brave people, don't you? Who will come up here and talk about their fears. So those people that I've already talked to, would you make your way and take one of these chairs and leave this middle one vacant? And I need one other person who has some great fear that they would like to share with the rest of us this morning. Who is one other person that would like to do that? Come on, or I'll volunteer you. Who? I saw a hand. All right, come on up here. Come up here. That's right. Come on. All right, come on up here and have a seat. There are 4 chairs here. Surely you can walk faster than this. Come on. I know it's hot outside, but yeah, have a seat. Take a seat. All right. Now, I'm going to start on my favorite side, my far left over here. And, oh, I'm sorry. Thanks. And if you will, start by telling us your name and tell us something about yourself that maybe you would like us to know that we don't know already about you.
My name is Cheryl Bruce, and I'm a retired nurse, and I came from Michigan. And my greatest fear is that God is being put on the back burner, and our children are not being taught, our grandchildren. It's a shame that they've taken God out of the schools and out of our government. That is something that really distresses me, and I've really been praying about that.
I'm Ed Jones, and I was home growing up in Effingham County, and moved here and started coming here about 6 years ago. And I suffered from smugness and just being so gifted. I mean, just so I've just had such a great life, and I worry about losing. And I think it's so much about me. I had that fear that change, that I might lose my job, like they're going to lay off Wall Street next month. I worry about the other people that might lose their job. The impending doom of not having money to pay for my feed my animals and not being able to live here anymore, they have to lose the ring. Those kind of fear of change, and also fear of things that are going on in the world too.
Okay.
My name is Jeanette.
A little bit closer, a little bit louder so we can hear you.
My name is Jeanette. I'm a mother of 3. My youngest child is, and always has been, a very small, petite child. When she was born, she was diagnosed with failure to thrive. Was in and out of the hospital. About a year and a half ago, defects decided that apparently there was some negligence going on and took all 3 of my children. The best result was me and my husband trying to jump through hoops to try and get our children back. And the stress of it destroyed our marriage. It destroyed our relationship. And in the face of it all, I still had to get up and keep fighting. I still had to keep picking up my pieces so that way I could keep jumping through those hoops in order to get my children to be able to come home. I faced one obstacle after the other. And the biggest fear I have is that even through all the hard work I've done, all the hoops that I've jumped through, and all the pain that I've endured in order so that they could have, will be for nothing. Because on August 7th, we have another court date coming up. That means in less than a month, I may not be able to bring my children home.
Well, I do apologize. I just overcame fear. I wanted to cry. Why did you want to cry? Everybody knows. Her story was very sad. But my greatest fear is treating other people the way I want to be treated. Yep, because I was a very bad kid. Why were you bad? Because I picked at anybody I could. They had to just get it. Why? Because I was in a risk home, so I didn't care who I hurt because I was being hurt. So I just didn't care. But today, I love to treat people the way I want to be treated. Why? Because if I do not, God is going to get me. I had one situation where I picked a little lady out here, and I picked at her, I just laughed. But one day, it was not very funny. A man just cussed me very bad. And I said to myself, if I ever pick with somebody again, I'd rather not have even much think to do that. So I have the greatest fear of just treating everyone that I know that I don't know the way I want to be treated. So that is one of my greatest fears. If I'm acting like somebody better help me because I just don't want to treat people the way I don't want to be treated.
And who are you?
Oh, I'm Tammy Davis, I'm sorry.
That's all right. All right. Sometimes greatest fears are surprises, aren't they? Sometimes they're very general fears, and sometimes they're very personal fears. So I want to thank all of these people for coming up here and playing Name That Fear, or Fully Clothed and Still Afraid, maybe. And y'all can have a seat. And let's thank these people for Did you hear any of your own fears this morning? Anything there that resonated with you? And I'm not talking about, there are those good fears, I guess we could call them. Fears that keep us from doing maybe stupid things or really things that could maybe save our lives, like being afraid of driving 100 miles an hour down Abercorn, or picking up a rattlesnake, or letting your parking meter time run out downtown. Now that's something to really be afraid of. I'm talking about fears that can cripple us, or can at the very least keep us from doing things that we want to do, or maybe should be doing. Maybe you have some of the fears mentioned just a minute ago, or maybe you have a very unique set of your very own. I'm amazed at the fears that I've heard this morning just walking around the church. Whichever, we all live in fear of something at some point in our lives. And even if you're fortunate enough to not let your fears consume you or take over your life, you probably had times when you had some thought of really being afraid. Maybe fear of a job interview. I heard that one this week. Fear of meeting your girlfriend or boyfriend's family. I heard that one recently. Maybe it's fear of war, fear of bad health, even some kind of general fear, like my chihuahuas are scared to death of bad weather or fireworks. My husband is scared of high places. I have to drive across all the bridges. I even had a basset hound one time that was afraid of aluminum. Yeah. This is true. Maybe you're afraid of what I heard this morning, change. But what we need to hear, each and every one of us needs to hear, is that we don't have to live our lives crippled by these fears of any kind. We need to be assured that there is a way to conquer, not the situation, but to be able to do something about our sweaty palms or the desire to take off running. Maybe you're familiar with the famous quote by Franklin Delano Roosevelt that says, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." Listen to that again. That's a mouthful. I've heard that first part many, many times, but I don't know about you, but the last part of it I've never heard. And it goes like this again. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Then the next part is nameless, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. I think that's a pretty relevant quote these days. Days when fear begins with often breaking news, which recently flashes on our TV screen almost every day. And almost always has to do with terror being unleashed on some group of unsuspecting, innocent people going about their daily lives. It doesn't seem like we're safe anywhere, does it? A lot of what's going on in the world today could cause us to retreat from life instead of advancing. Many of the situations that we're most fearful of today, they don't give us any warning. Everything is okay one minute and terrifying the very next. Certainly fear has been around since Adam and Eve. But we can look back, I think, 15 years ago, when our country's idea about security and fear changed dramatically. It was a sunny September day. I'll never forget it. You probably remember what you were doing on 9/11. Richard and I were on our way to the Atlanta airport to catch a plane to LA. We were really excited about the trip, and nothing else was extraordinary about that day until, as we were about to get into the car to leave for the airport, one of our neighbors came running across our yard yelling for us not to go to the airport, that all the airports in the country were closed, that a plane had flown into the World Trade Center. You're crazy, I thought. What would close all the airports in the country? I wasn't afraid yet, but we ran back into the house just in time to see the second plane plane flying into the other tower. And another plane crashed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. A fourth plane intended to hit the White House but crashed instead into a field in Pennsylvania. Everything was okay. We were loading suitcases into the car to make a trip, and it was terrifying the next. We watched in horror as people jumped from the towers to escape the planes. We heard the desperate phone calls from the passengers on the plane, on board the hijacked planes, and cried with them as they told their last goodbyes to their families. That day, as I remember, was a wild combination of shock, confusion, grief, sorrow, anger, and fear. And it does seem that kind of fear began in a new way for us that day. Real fear keeps a lot of people from doing lots of things, and it did that day and for many days after that. There was nothing else on the television, nothing else really that we talked about except 9/11. It often keeps us from doing what we want to do or often need to do. I think that's fear's job. It pulls the blinds on living fully and sometimes even hoping fully. Fear sounds the call for retreat, not anything else. Not to stop and think, much less to face the future with courage. Real fear can absolutely forget words like overcoming or living in the light or depending on the power of God. But then sometimes even on days like 9/11, right in the middle of, I'm calling it real fear, courage and strength rises up, and something brighter than fear happens and serves as a beacon of light and hope. And ordinary people see an extraordinary day become heroes. Like one I recall, Myra Smith, a New York Police Department officer. She first reported the attack and immediately ran into the towers and began helping people to get out. She did everything she could to help people get out. And not only that, she helped them to stay calm in an indescribable situation. Help them to not be afraid. Or someone like Wells Crother, an investment banker who worked on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center. And right after Flight 174 hit the South Tower, he called his mother and let her know he was okay. Then he started working as hard as he could to help people evacuate. He carried one woman down 17 flights of stairs and then returned to the 78th floor to continue helping others. He made it out of the building just in time, but when he was running back into the building, when the tower collapsed, Wells Crother was 24 years old. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power of love and a sound mind. That's 2 Timothy 1:7. Have I commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. That's from Joshua. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. From Psalm 23. And then from John 14, you know this one. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. I believe that the writers of all those words have met fear, eyeball to eyeball. Just like the teacher named Caitlin at Sandy Hook Elementary School, who quietly led her young students into a tiny bathroom while gunfire blasted all around them. They waited, and she hoped and prayed. In her book, Choosing Hope, Moving Forward from Life's Darkest Hours, she says that the day of the shooting started out as a typically happy one, a beautiful day in fact. But while waiting in that tiny bathroom, she feared they would all die. So she said to the children, Anyone who believes in the power of prayer needs to pray right now. And anyone who does not needs to think really happy thoughts. On that day, Adam Lanza killed 20 small pupils and 6 staff. Thanks be to God, all of Caitlin's pupils survived. In Orlando just a couple of weeks ago, Joshua McGill made tourniquets to save a bartender who was shot 3 times. Joshua said, "I promise you, God's got this. You'll be okay." He recalls then saying, "I was mainly scared. I was like, God, don't make me break my promise." Christopher Hansen helped carry a woman to paramedics after she was shot. From CNN, this statement went out. Out of this senseless act of violence, heroes rose to call. Heroes who put themselves in harm's way to save others. There have been way too many tragic stories like these in recent days and years. In San Bernardino, even in church in Charleston, in Baghdad, in Oklahoma City, in Paris, in Colorado, and now most recently in Dallas, Louisiana, and Minnesota. In way too many places on the map, people have become afraid of other people. People here in Savannah are afraid to enjoy our beautiful streets and parks because of violence and the fear of violence. But for every story of terror and fear, there are stories and more stories of those who have stood up to fear. I have my own story. I remember the young woman who ran to my aid one night many years ago. I never knew her name. I was also a young woman on my way home from work just 3 days before Christmas when a man walked up beside me and told me to get into my car. He pulled a gun out of his pocket, and when I didn't move quickly to get into the car, he started to take my arm and force me into the car. I was scared, but I knew that if I was going to die that night, it was going to be right there in that parking lot. So I pulled away from him, and I started screaming. I started screaming. "Help me! Somebody help me!" Just as loud as I could. And down the hill, I could see a lot of people standing around the buildings, and nobody was moving towards me. Nobody but one young woman, and she came running up the hill screaming, "I'm coming, I'm coming." I didn't know what she could do, but she surely looked like an angel to me. And the man with the gun turned and walked and got into his car and drove away. She didn't know what she was running to help that night, but she did it anyway. These were all people who did not let fear paralyze them, didn't let fear keep them from doing what was needed to convert retreat into advance. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Whom shall I be afraid? What makes the difference in fear that cripples and fear that rejects being crippled? Well, I have another of my own stories. It goes like this. I was driving home very late one night, and I was still going to college. I had worked all day and driven 80 miles to school and sat through classes and then was driving 80 miles back home that night. I was on a long, 2-lane, curvy country road in the North Georgia mountains. And I was praying hard. The rain was driving. You know, it seemed to be coming towards my windshield. I thought about all the deer I'd seen on that road before. I was really afraid. But suddenly, instead of seeing the rain as coming at me, it was as if the rain began to be pulling me and leading me in my car up the road towards home. The very thing that had me terrified had actually shown me the way to go home. Now I felt amazed at the moment. I knew what I had to do. Just be calm and keep going. I prayed for the rain to stop, to get home safely, but I learned that night that the situation may not change, but how I perceive it can make all the difference in the world. Is that what happens when we respond to God's care instead of panicking and giving up? Mark 5:36 says, "Do not fear, only believe." Another psalm says, "When anxiety is great within me, your consolation brought me joy." Is faith been the opposite of fear? We tend to think that the opposite of faith is unbelief. But maybe unbelief is really fear in disguise. I believe that anything that makes us afraid, crime, sickness, rejection, fear of failure, fear of trying, debt, terrorism, gunfire, speaking in public, you name it. It is the light that changes the uncertainty and the gloom into strength and hope. Have you ever walked into a dark room where it was totally black, where there were no windows, and you couldn't see a thing, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face? Suddenly, somebody flips on a light switch. Everything changes. Our faith can be seen like that kind of light, and our strength when we are afraid. Does that mean that we are free from bad things happening? Of course not. Our lives will continue to be subject to our decisions, good and bad, to the decisions of others, good and bad. Good people, faithful people, get into tough spots. They do not. A person pulls a gun in a convenience store while we're in there. Trusting God doesn't mean we can't equip with a God shield that repels bullets, but it does mean that because we hold God as our light, and because we believe God is our salvation, and because we know God is our protection, our stronghold, that we can be strong in spite of it. We don't have to give up and let the situation completely determine what we're going to do. We're certainly still growing and subject to all the events of life that everybody else is. But we don't have to shake in our boots because we're stricken from paralyzing fear. How is that, you say? Because I know that God is the ultimate and final winner, and that God is there, and that nothing, not bullets, not lost jobs, not divorce, not terrible lab results, not disappointments with children, not betrayal by lovers or friends, not fear or anything, nothing, no nothing can separate us from the love of God. I was widowed at age 23. I was divorced at age 25, and finally remarried for the last 34 years. I've had 4 children and cried at times over each one of them, loved and helped raise 7 grandchildren. I've worked in car dealerships, hospitals, offices, churches, and in shelters for women who are crushed by battering spouses. I've lived to see all kinds of people hurt and broken by drugs, illness, hatred, mental illness, and bigotry. And through all of it, I have come to a place where I am still sure, that not even death can separate us from the love of God. No, not even death. I see that belief and that strength in humans every day. All kinds of ways that people right here in Savannah, Georgia, right in the middle of shootings and robberies and violence and orange ribbons, resist retreating, and they do advance forward. When it's easier to do nothing, when they could let being afraid, let them just be silent and complacent. Ma Hannah in Savannah feeds the hungry. She fed hungry people on the 4th of July. She feeds them also on Thanksgiving and Christmas. Does she have to do it? Some people say that she's nuts for giving away all that food. And then there's Danielle Polanco, who lives in Savannah and has a family in a small town in the Dominican Republic. She works all of her spare time to raise money to build a health clinic there. She has car washes, collects clothes, medical supplies, and money to raise just $76,000 needed to build the clinic. Do you know Curtis Armstrong? Anybody know Curtis Armstrong? Probably not. But Curtis has helped the homeless in Savannah through his family unity group anonymously for 11 years. He recently handed out free bag lunches to anyone who needed them in Forsyth Park. A lot of people I know are afraid of homeless people. Here's a local hero I really like, Samaj Clark. Samaj was in Savannah from California last October when he was shot and left paralyzed. He says, I felt I had to return to Savannah to work as an anti-violence activist. He laughs at himself when he says, I couldn't run away. So he works with Reverend Thurman Tillman at the First African Baptist Church, speaking to anyone where he can spread his message that says people have to stop hurting each other. There's also a 9-year-old boy whose identity I can't give you, but who came forward when he saw a burglary being committed. This brave kid has been credited for the conviction of 3 burglars. Children often teach us a lot about acting in the face of fear. A 5th grader, Taylor Haran, noticed smoke coming out of one of the eaves of her school. She immediately ran to the office and told the maintenance man, Richard Mason. Oh, and you need to know that a life was saved in this act of heroism. Mason noticed that Charlie, the school's pet bearded lizard, was left in the room. Richard said, I just ran in there and grabbed Charlie out of the aquarium and gave it to the principal. She wasn't very happy about it. Heroism comes in all different ways, doesn't it? The psalmist's words are as vital and meaningful to us today as to the people who first heard them. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Can we really live with no fear? No. Probably not without some moments of anxiety, some concerns, some frightful thoughts. But we do not have to live our lives consumed with worry and fear. We don't have to let the problem get us instead of getting it. I wanted to talk today about fear because of what's been happening in our country, our world, our city, our own streets. I've never let fear dictate what I do or where I go. But I have to admit that lately I've been making some detours because I've been afraid. My own granddaughter, who has come to church here with me a lot, saw a body in the street after a gunshot on her way home from church here one Sunday. I've been concerned about being in crowds of people because of the talk of terror of one kind or another. But you know what? I don't want to live my life that way. You know what else? I'm not going to live like that. And mostly I don't want to live in fear instead of faith. I don't want to fear to cause me to retreat instead of advancing. I want to go to the parade, not watch it on TV. No, I want to be in the parade instead of peeping through the blinds. Have you been thinking about some of your own fears? Have you been making detours lately because of them? Maybe they have you shaking in your boots at times, I don't know. Maybe they've kept you from doing things that you want to do, things that you'd be so good doing. Conquering our fears is not just a matter of self-determination. I can't just decide I'm going to do it. But I do have to decide that I want to stand up to it. We just might be someone's hero if we advance and don't retreat. It's a matter of dependence on the God whom we can trust and love. And by the way, I think that overcoming fear is a matter of love. We're not afraid to do anything for anybody if we love enough. Letting fear cripple us is a loss we may never recover. We may pull back into our feeling safe place so much that we never go back. We never go back. It's missing out. It's giving up. It's letting evil win. God's power in our lives shows up as love and sound thinking and doing in spite of fear. And with Him, and only with Him, can there be no fear. I heard a story about a woman who walked into a very dark room, like we talked about earlier. They were going to show a movie in that room, and there was no windows and total blackness in there. She knew there were other people in the room, but when she walked in, it was too dark to see anybody. After a moment, in the dark, she felt a small hand take her hand just out of the darkness. She whispered, "Who does this little hand belong to?" And out of the darkness came a small voice that said, "It belongs to you until the lights come on." For I am the Lord your God who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, "Do not fear, I will help you." His